All right, I have missed you guys very, very much. We're continuing with our Jean Gebser series. I haven't done a video in like 3 days, and I'm feeling the itch. I need to get back to you guys. I missed doing our Gebser series, so thank you guys for continuing to watch. Today we are officially starting Book 2 proper. We're going to do the Irruption of Time. First, we're going to start with the interim word because I think it's important. It's good to hear Gebser kind of talk to us man to man, so to speak, where he's not necessarily teaching us anything. He's just trying to give us a clear idea of where he's coming from and where he wants you to be. So, 1 second. Excuse me. All right. So, like I said, we are going to do the interim word. Then we're going to jump into the Irruption of Time. And depending how long this video is will depend on how far I go. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to cover this entire section today. Because as you can see here, I have quite the amount of things highlighted and circled and underlined. We have quite a lot to go through. There's a lot going on. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, so the interim word starts out with a couple quotes. One is from Holderlin. It says, "But where there is peril, deliverance too gains in strength." And Paul Valery says, "Spirit must tip the scales, or mankind is doomed." I agree. All right, so Gebser says, "The first part of the present work was devoted to the foundations of what we have designated as the aperspectival world. In the second part, we are concerned with the manifestations of this aperspectival world, and in order to make these manifestations evident, we have had to be somewhat daring and have included in our discussion a wide variety of scientific disciplines, artistic manifestations, and general phenomena of our epoch. This thankless task..." See, Gebser does have something of a sense of humor. "This thankless task has been exacerbated by the present-day fragmentation of the sciences into specialized and subspecialized disciplines, as well as by the attendant diversity of terminologies. Notwithstanding these obstacles and the risk of being accused of meddling in, quote, areas outside of one's specialty," unquote. You can tell Gebser went to his buddies and was like, "Hey, I've just solved all our problems," and you could hear these morons just go. You have to understand, we only confer truth by specialized, sectored specialties. So if you make a statement on physics and you don't exclusively work on physics, you must by definition be wrong. I think that's kind of funny. Areas outside of one's specialty in this extensive undertaking by a single individual. We have had to take into account the most diverse areas, since otherwise the validity of our demonstration could well be questioned. Only if the attempt is made for once to consider the most diverse areas of knowledge and manifestation of art and their underlying and common basic concern with reference to the mode of thought and particular terminology of each discipline, will it be possible to make this basic concern evident." So this is why I like being a generalist, and this is why Gebser has improved my ability to be a generalist, because he says, hey, understand these disciplines on their own terms, which is awesome. Or more exactly, only in this way will it be possible to demonstrate the initial aperspectival manifestations which have become ever more insistent in recent decades. A further complicating circumstance in the realization of our stated task is inherent in the natural condition of our epoch. We're going to read this whole thing, by the way. It's not too long. It's about 2 pages in total. Since a restructuration of our form of realization is now taking place, all of its manifestations are Janus-faced. On the one hand, they are still bound to the conscious structure in force until now, which, to the extent that it is deficient, is now threatening to collapse. Yet they are already indebted to the new, yet only gradually emerging consciousness structure, which is in the process of formation. As a consequence, a certain confusion comes to the fore because the weakened foundations of the old manner of thinking are not yet sufficiently counterbalanced by the consolidation of the new mode of perception. So what's happening is, because the reason why we're having so many problems is because we're in an age of transition. So the old way of doing things, the rational 3D spatial way of doing things, is collapsing. Now, obviously, this is going to confer anxiety on us. At the same time, we can't make that full-on switch to integral consciousness because we don't really know what it is. There's nothing to really grasp on there. There's nothing that we can point to and say that is undeniably an improvement to what we have here. So we're stuck in the worst of both worlds. Where on one hand, the structure we built and that we rely on is collapsing, and this is obviously terrible. On the other hand, we're going to cling to it anyways because what is being presented is so beyond our mode of comprehension that we immediately assume it's worse for us than our destructive worldview. So because we can't really understand it, and because that in turn confers an even higher degree of anxiety and fear, well, we're going to cling on to our dying worldview. I want to make a point because I had sort of a spiritual, I had a moment of integral awakening and where I sort of consciously attained origin. And what happened was, now I'm going to make a video about awakening integral consciousness. It's just, I need time. Remember, guys, time is an intensity, so we have to listen to time. It's not the right time to do it right now, so I'll do it when the time says it is. But I was trying really hard, and I made a mistake because I was trying to will it into existence. But remember, will and ego and I, the individual Justin, will do this. That's mental structure stuff. So I pushed down too hard on trying to will my way into awakening integral consciousness. Well, I made the mistake of not balancing the making happening of willing ego, which is part of it, undeniably. You can do things that sort of allow these things to work their own magic, but I went too far. I said, no, I will awaken it on my own with no other help. That's ridiculous. So, on one hand, I made the mistake and I didn't balance making happen and letting happen. I didn't let origin happen. I didn't allow it to work its magic, almost quite literally. And I made that mistake. And I was very, very, very frustrated, very disheartened, very discouraged, quite frankly. I almost, at least for 30 seconds, I almost quit. I almost considered quitting this Gebser series because I felt like I had sold you all a bag of goods, but I didn't. So what happened with this next day was I was driving for work, and I looked to my left, and I see this beautiful farm. It was like 85 degrees. It was very hot, but it was very beautiful. And I see these horses coming down. And in those 2 seconds, I felt origin. I felt time intensify and integrate. And origin was present. And I consciously understood it. There really wasn't an I there, because I is ego. So the ego was kind of gone. I wasn't really self-reflecting. Time intensified, and I felt a deep spiritual presence in those seconds. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. You want to be careful when you're shedding rationalism and trying to awaken integral consciousness. You have a real potential to get lost in the worst of both worlds, where you've destroyed the old way of doing things, but you haven't yet awakened the new and improved way of doing things. So now you're in limbo. Don't do that. You must find a balance between making happen and letting happen. And if it doesn't happen, then you move on. We don't try to will everything into existence. That's rationalist arrogance. Gebser continues. If the first part of this work had not attempted to describe the quote-unquote foundations and to emphasize the permanent or lasting values, it might be charged that we are concerned here with mere modernism and not with demonstrating what will be seen to be a transposition of genuine values. Much of what goes on today is a dissolution, but it is not a dissolution, for dissolution also contains a solution. An example is the incursion so evident today into the minus or negative realm of events. This is interesting. Because the zero, which we inherited via the Arabs from India, acquired particularly during the Renaissance the character of a cipher and limit and became a detriment of our manner of thinking and realization, which tend towards dualism, we have been caught up in a process during recent generations which in a definitely tragic way led to the dissolution and annulment of this very mode of thought. To a dissolution, however, which prepared the way for the solution to our predicament. The incursion into the negative or minus domain that lies below the zero, of which we spoke, has come about in all areas of human endeavor. So, zero in math is nothing. Now, this can be a problem because we're trying to quantifiably measure everything. Now, inefficient rationality, and this is just my own sort of thing, I imagine we healthily engaged with the zero in mathematics. But then once rationalism comes out, right, no, we have to know everything. So we breach that limit, and we try to know even further. And the problem is that's a very fine line. That is a very fine line. And what you do is you divide and divide, and sometimes you find things that you wish you hadn't found, and some things that will come up and destroy you. And that's what we're going to get into. Physics, for example, has discovered the tiny quote-unquote magnitudes, or quanta, whose ever-increasing refinement threatens to abet a substanceless crypto-materialism. Oh, by the way, I want to read this, by the way, because this is, there's a footnote that I thought was really funny. Okay, so it says, ever-increasing refinement threatens to abet a substanceless crypto-materialism. And then the footnote here says, an example of such crypto-materialism is the neurotic denial of the immaterial origin of matter, an origin now evident from developments in nuclear physics. Russian scientists are forced into this rejection for the sake of keeping the Marxist ideology intact, which traces everything to matter. So Gebser does not like your materialist nonsense. Marxists owned and dominated. Psychoanalysis has unleashed psychic residua and encouraged the revitalization of factors previously sheltered in forgetfulness. So again, what we're doing is we're seeing how we're breaching that limit represented by the value 0, which that's it. We're done. You can't go further. Well, we've gone further, and now we're seeing problems. Philosophy, notably existentialism, which is a waste of time, and basic ontologistic philosophy has escaped into mere existence, or existere, that is, being exposed. Modern art has destroyed and annulled the old forms of expression and perception, and the everyday life of the individual has been subjected to the increasing terror of an invasion of minus or negative values in the perverted, quantified, and degrading form of rampant automation and mechanized, senseless, quote, spinning of wheels. Let me try that again. And the everyday life of the individual has been subjected to the increasing terror of an invasion of quote-unquote minus or negative values in the perverted, quantified, and degrading form of rampant automation and mechanized, senseless spinning of wheels. So I think what he's saying, kind of like Deleuze and Guattari, we've breached the limits of our healthy engagement with technology. So in turn, now technology is subsuming us, and it's making us feel like these little cogs in a machine who, instead of us guiding technology, technology is guiding us. That's not good. Although unbeknown to most, this negative aspect of our era represents, in its unrecognized overvaluation of the quote-unquote minus realm, the very essence of modernism. And this modernism must not be identified with the new structure of consciousness. So what he's saying is integral consciousness and modernity are not necessarily the same thing. Integral consciousness will be efficient once properly understood, but this obsession with the minus, that's deficient rationalism, combined maybe with a deficient, incipient integral consciousness. So all the problems with modernism, Gebser saying, this is not efficient integral consciousness, not even close. It is only the necessary side effect of its restructuration and can only complicate the clarification of our epoch and our situation at first glance, particularly as there is no quote-unquote going back. Hey, right-wing conservative guys, are you listening? There is no going back. You will never just go back to the 15th century or the 16th century with your overly romanticized and idealized nonsense where everything had this perfect order and perfect place, and you take all this terrible stuff and you just conveniently forget about it, okay? Stop doing that. You are destroying your own movement by doing that. We emphasize this point because mere modernism or love of novelty must not be mistaken for the new aperspectival structure of awareness. The justice of this observation will be borne out in the course of the first 4 chapters of the second part. Without them, the following chapters, devoted exclusively to the manifestations of the aperspectival world, would cause misunderstandings even at the terminological level in our estimation of these manifestations. Let us once again note in passing, above and beyond these clarifications, our central thesis. With each mutation of consciousness, origin acquires an intensified conscious character of presentness. Origin, which bears the imprint of the whole and of the spiritual, and is before time and space, becomes time-free, quote-unquote, present. It is the aperspectival world that acquires this ever-present origin and thereby supersedes the perspectival world. Even Karl Jaspers, despite his existential and thus one-sided, fixed mode of thinking, refers in passing to, quote, a life from ever-present origin, unquote, on the last page of his Origin and Aims of History, which was published in the same year as the first part of the present work. And during the past few years, notably in the English-speaking countries, the idea has gained acceptance that, in physical, cosmogonical terms, origin is present. It has gained currency through Fred Hoyle's cosmogony, and cosmogony is just a mythology about the origin of the universe. That's all it is. It sounds kind of fancy, but that's all it is. It has gained currency through Fred Hoyle's cosmogony, where he has stated that the world is a continuous creation that proceeds from what he calls the background matter, which continuously affects the requisite uninterrupted new creation of matter that does not come from anywhere, but simply appears. So behind all this spatial stuff is this invisible structuring system that is origin, and it is discontinuous, it is acausal, and it sort of works its magic through moment to moment, kind of like quantum action. We'll be explaining all of this. Origin is present, but it's a continuous affecting process. So it's this invisible, again, structuring process, quote unquote, behind, if you'll excuse my rational spatialization, that is constantly affecting, constantly working its magic on us. We just have been obscured from it because of our rationalist nonsense. Origin is present. Anyone who is able to perceive this spiritual state of affairs has already overcome the confusion of our epoch and maintains the greater and more decisive reality of the whole, that unique entirety and integrity, which is always both origin and present. Beautiful. Okay, so now we're going to get into it. The Irruption of Time. This is on the edition we're working on, page 283. The eruption of time into our consciousness. This is the profound and unique event of our historical moment. It presents us with a new theme and a new task, and its realization, which comes about through us, is attended by a wholly new reality of the world, a new intensity, and a freer awareness which supplant the confusion that seems to give our world its most characteristic stamp. By the way, unfortunately, and I hate to do this to you guys, because we're starting book 2, we're going to be doing a little more outlines in these chapters. I do apologize. Okay, I know that to a certain extent, the whole first book was an outline. To a certain extent, we did fill in the dots when we needed to, and we're going to be doing more outlines. But then we're going to be filling in the dots. Once we get into science, it's going to start getting real and it's going to start getting good. I mean, this is all good. Don't get me wrong. I obviously love this stuff, but I apologize about the outlines. Wherever we encounter this theme in the manifestational forms of our lives, we are face to face with the initial manifestations of the aperspectival world. Where today we seem to discern only shrieks and dissonance, we will find a new tone, a new form, a new perception. The more the manifestations of our age of transition and decline make known their desperate and furious struggle, the greater will the vitality and intensity of the new world-transforming manifestations stand out. Every one of us today, in his or her own way, wherever we may be, is not only a witness, but an instrument of what is to be reality. Hence the necessity for us to create the means with which we ourselves can jointly shape this new reality. Beautiful. The new reality, the reality as we know it, is dependent upon our consciousness structures. So a reality to someone lost in the mental structure is going to be confined to space, right? So in many ways, we are an instrument in creating our own reality. So for reality to improve, we need to drop our deficient mental rationalist and embrace efficient, integral, aperspectival thought. Let's see. Where do I want to start? We will have made a decisive step when we are able to realize the full complexity of the question of time. That is, when we have actualized the new to the degree that we can consciously avail ourselves of it. What is occurring today is occurring almost of itself, or more exactly, of the itself. It is essential that everyone, each individual I, know how to conduct himself so that the new for which he is co-responsible can have a constructive effect. That's the whole point, right? So when we embrace these deficient structures, whether it be mental, mythical, or magic, all of a sudden reality starts to become a problem. It affects reality, and it slaps us back in the face with our own deficiencies. Our deficiencies are projected into the external world, and because the internal and external are polar complements, It comes back to us. It always comes back to us. Kind of like an economic policy. Everything is connected. There's no separation here. So that's why it's important for us, as he said, we have to be conscious of these things so we can healthily channel these new intensities, qualities, ways of viewing the world, ways of reifying the world, and dimensions into a healthy society and a healthy individual life. Excuse my drinking because it's very hot where I live, and I went on a run today and it was rough, so I have to take some water breaks. Excuse me. Okay. As our deliberations in the first part have shown, quote-unquote time, that is mental rational time, is a partitioning principle as well as a concept. When we speak here within a broader context of quote-unquote time, we are not referring merely to the concept of time. Nevertheless, we must begin with this diminished form. Among all the possible time forms, the mental rational concept of time is most closely akin to our traditional consciousness. Only when we take this temporal fragment into account as being a divider do we become aware that it can merely initiate a world-transforming consciousness structure. The concept of time is only an inceptual motif for the awakening consciousness of the a-perspectival world. So the concept of time, as we've discussed in this series, is a bastardization of real time. You've taken an intensity and externalized it. But what are we doing here? The fact that we did that at all clearly shows that time, even if we've bastardized it, even if we haven't fully understood it on its own terms, we're still clearly thinking about this stuff. You can see this, by the way, in Heidegger, being and time, and everyone's talking about time nowadays. Now, of course, we just can't understand it, but that's what Gebser is here for. So the fact that the mental structure was even engaging with time at all, let alone a bastardization of it, shows that clearly something is trying to get out, something is banging at the door, trying to break it down and enter the room. As long as it remains in force, it being time, of course, the dividing, disrupting, and dissolving aspects will remain dominant, and yet such division, disruption, and dissolution prepare the way for a new reality. What is prepared for is more than a mere concept of quote-unquote time. It is the achronon, or time freedom, a freedom and liberation from every temporal form, and for every temporal form. I added that myself. So it's interesting. Very, very interesting phenomenon we have here. On one hand, mental structure is engaging with time. It bastardizes it in its own way. Fine. On the other hand, it was this bastardization which inspired the ensuing understanding from Gebser about time proper. So very fascinating phenomenon. Very, very interesting. There's also a parallel here. So in the mythical structure, the deficient aspects of the mythical structure, what happened with deficient myth? It became so overwhelming, so individually interpretive, so symbolic, so relative, that it overwhelmed the psyche, and people were just led by their emotions and by their soul, and they had no way of really just kind of using their ego and just like, why don't we slow down a little bit? Why don't we stop killing everyone, and maybe we can create food and do all this good stuff, do all this rational stuff. The way that the mental structure sort of came about is that people took the abundance and the plenitude of mythical imagery and they started to pick it apart one by one. This is, of course, rational mental way of doing things. So they say, okay, so this symbol means this, and it must mean this and only this. It can't mean this other thing, because if we allow it to mean these 80 other things, we're going to end up right back where we started, and we're just going to be overwhelmed. So very interesting. And the mental structure emerged almost as a last gasp survival response from being overwhelmed in the mythic structure. And now we're seeing that with time. We're seeing with the a-perspectival integral consciousness, where on one hand, it's growing out of an awareness or perception of deficient time. So it's that's bullcrap. So now we're going to understand it properly. Very, very interesting pattern there. Very interesting. Let's see. Where did I stop? Our present consciousness, Gebser says, is one of transition, a consciousness in the process of mutation, which is beginning to unfold new forms of realization. At the moment when consciousness became able to account for the essence of quote-unquote time, time erupted. The sense of eruption is ambiguous, just as the moments of transition are ambiguous and Janus-faced. The term eruption, that's I-R-R-U-P-T-I-O-N, by the way, signifies both the intrusion as well as the collapse of time for our consciousness. So time as an intensity has affected our consciousness structures. It has intruded, but unfortunately, because we have not been able to muster the intensity of consciousness to understand it on its own terms, it has destroyed. It has had a destructive, corrosive effect. And we're also later on, not in this video, but later on, we're going to see the problems of implementing mental time as the fourth dimension. Because, of course, with space, in 3D space, what did we do? We know this. We divided everything, right? This is perspectivity. This is rational thought. The division is inherent. But when you incorporate, so we already have division as the dimension. We don't need more division, but we incorporated mental time. That's a divider. That's a partitioner, and it overstretches Earth past its limits and becomes destructive and corrosive. Not good. But what is quote-unquote time? It is more than a mere clock time, which was previously considered to be reliable and constant. It is symptomatic for our predicament that today, in the light of the most recent research, even astronomy has brought into question the constancy of clock time. The topic for discussion at a general meeting of the Swiss Astronomical Association at Lausanne, spring 1951, was, quote, is time constant? It is in fact not constant, but decreases by 5.3 seconds per century, as G. Thiercy of the University of Geneva Observatory has demonstrated. This result confirms in its own way the remark by E. Rosenstock-Huessy that we are, quote, today laboring on a science of time, unquote, which, as he emphasizes, does not itself do justice to the true phenomenon of time. And chronological time is but one aspect of a more encompassing phenomenon. It is the mental aspect of the constituent of the world which manifests itself not as space, but as the basic phenomenon of space. So time has many different manifestations, many different qualities, many different intensities. Your understanding of time, the mental rational understanding of time, is but one understanding of time, and it is the mental, quantifiably measurable aspect. The three-dimensional conceptual world of our fathers had no sensorium for the phenomenon of time. Living in a spatially frozen world, they considered the temporal world to be a disturbing factor which was repressed, either by being ignored or by being falsified by measurement into a spatial component. That is to say, in the perspectival world conception, everything was measured in spatial terms, including the phenomenon of time and other phenomena devoid of spatial properties, which were reshaped by measure into spatial components. For a perspective-thinking man, time lacked all quality. This is the decisive factor. He employed time only in a materialized and quantitative sense. He lived by Galileo's maxim. Now, this maxim is the maxim for rationalist. It is I could not think of a better maxim to encompass the rationalist. Listen to this. Quote, to measure everything measurable and to make everything measurable that is not yet measurable. You like the emphasis on measurement there? That's pretty funny. But that really is what the rationalists do. They measure everything measurable, which is fine, because we're in the realm of measurability. Go ahead, knock yourself out. But we're also going to measure everything that is immeasurable, and if it's immeasurable, we're going to pretend it's measurable anyways and just stick with that. This maxim, an Aristotelian axiom driven to extremes, formed the leading motif of the perspectival age. But to measure is to spatialize, and rampant measurement leads to quantification. One of the best authorities on the theories and philosophies of the perspectival age, Werner Gent, stated that the age had declassed and degraded time to a mere numerical quantity. Now, by the way, if for whatever reason you don't, maybe because you just don't like me, and that's fair, but if you want me to go into this, I have on my Kill Rationalism series, I believe it's part 9, it's called What is Time? Go check that out. We kind of dive deep into this and how it can affect you personally if you're interested. But we also talked about this in the mental conception of time. So hopefully you guys are caught up on all this. Stated in more precise terms, that era had perverted time by making it into an analytical, measurable relationship and by materializing it. Because of the materialization, the relationships gave rise in the course of the last few centuries to an extreme dualistic form of thinking, which recognized only two antithetical and irreconcilable constituents of the world: measurable, demonstrable things, the rational component of science, which were valid, and the non-measurable phenomena, the irrational non-components, which were invalid. Beautifully put. That is the rationalist dualism. It's measurable, it's demonstrable, therefore it's better. Yours is immeasurable and irrational, therefore it's inferior. To the perspectival age, time meant nothing but a system of measurements or relationships between two moments. Time as a quality or an intensity was simply not taken into account. It was deemed to be only an accidental and inessential phenomenon. Time, however, that is, of course, the expanded view of time, not just mental time, but all forms of time. Time, however, is a much more complex phenomenon than the mere instrumentality or accidents of chronological time. The fact that we today still think in terms of the spatial, fixed, three-dimensional world of conceptuality is an obstacle to our realization of the more complex significance of the phenomenon. That's an interesting point when he says, the fact that we today still think in terms of our spatial, fixed, three-dimensional world of conceptuality. Think about that for a second. When everything is spatially fixed and everything is still, the rationalist, in turn, can confer a higher degree of order. Higher degree of order. I don't know what the hell I was just saying. Because everything is fixed and still, there's no potential for change, and the change brings with it not only potential for improvement or deprovement, but it also brings with it new phenomena that you now have to analyze and put through this nexus of causality. So when everything is still and fixed and static, a greater degree of order is conferred by the rationalists. This, I believe, is one of the reasons why the rationalists are so strong in holding on to their worldview, because it provides order, provides security. But the problem is, it's deficient now. The world is constantly in flux. We're constantly moving. So unfortunately, your static, fixed systems fail. And you see this also in politics, too, when people describe what America is. So when you do that, when you say this is what America is, you fix it into this static, still thing. The problem is, like I just said, we're constantly in movement. And you can even see this with someone in Spangler, right? Like you're constantly going through these, if you want to call them stages, fine. But you're constantly in flux, you're constantly in this sort of dynamic change, and there's an incongruence here. So either two things are going to happen. Either one, we're going to try to change the movement of culture, people, history in accordance with my static, still, fixed, deficient system, or we're going to change the static, fixed, still system in accordance with the people. But the problem with that is it's very difficult to confer any sort of order on what this is, because it's constantly changing. And if it's constantly changing and it constantly matches the changes of the population, of the people who populate it, well, then at a certain point, someone's just going to realize, well, this can just be whatever the hell I want. And then you get these, and then of course another group is going to say, no, we want it to be whatever the hell we want, and now we got problems. Interesting stuff here. Another reason why the rationalists, we have to have some sympathy for the rationalists. They're not necessarily evil. Some of them can be, but that's a minority of them. Sympathy. Oh, and that's another thing. He makes this point another. The static, still fixed thing going on. Speaking of politics, take polls. So let's say in the 2024 election, the polls said Biden was at X and the polls said Trump was at Y. You'll note it. Let's say they did that poll a year and a half before election, or maybe a year before election. Biden's at X, Trump is at Y. Here's the problem. They're never going to just stop at that one poll. Why would they do that? Because they're fixing themselves and they're limiting themselves to one particular moment in time. So what they do is they say, okay, we have our poll, that's 1 year out. And then they're just going to do polls every week, every 2 weeks. The reason why is because they're incorporating time into their countenance. They recognize that people are not these static, still things. There are always these new developments in politics that affect people's perception. So we need to incorporate not just space, because we can get what they believe in a spatial world, but also time. Recognize that they're constantly in flux. And then hopefully, as the election grows grows closer, each campaign can say, this is where they're at. We knew where they were. This is where they're at now. So, interesting stuff. Gebser continues. Anyone who dares to venture such a realization is accused of terminological obfuscation. But this should not prevent us from stating that time as a reality encompasses still other essential forms of appearance, which are proper to it alone and not space. To the perception of the aperspectival world, time appears to be the very fundamental function, and to be of a most complex nature. And if you follow my other videos, you'll have heard this next line before, because I've stolen this for my What is Time video and all this other stuff. Time, manifests itself in accordance with a given consciousness structure and the appropriate possibility of manifestation in its various aspects as clock time, natural time, cosmic or sidereal time, as biological duration, rhythm, meter, as mutation, discontinuity, relativity, as vital dynamics, psychic energy, and, finally, as mental dividing. It manifests itself as the unity of past, present, and future, as the creative principle, the power of imagination, as work, and even as motoricity. And along with the vital, psychic, biological, cosmic, rational, creative, sociological, and technical aspects of time, we must include, last but not least, physical, geometrical time, which is designated as the fourth dimension. The seemingly random enumeration of temporal aspects may be disconcerting to someone unable to disengage himself from his three-dimensional conception of the world. To a systematician, these aspects will seem to be incongruent quantities, but they are not quantities. They are elements and functionals which cannot be conceived of or arrayed in spatial terms. So when you point all this out, and you say, hey, look at all these different manifestations of this intensity. That seems to, this intensity is manifesting kind of in a perceived extensity, whether it be, like you said, cosmic time, clock time, natural time, sidereal time, all that stuff. A rationalist cannot take into account. They're static, still, systematizing, will never be able to take this into account. So when you try to convince them, you have to make it clear that they're static, systematizing, will not do this. You have to get them out of space and get them into time, into intensity. Not everything is going to have this perfectly ordered, divided, clear order. It isn't going to work that way. The apparent lack of a system that seems to prevail in our enumeration, in fact, corresponds to the respective realities. So the fact that we're not using a system at all is not because we don't want to, just to piss you off. It's because the reality is that this cannot be conceived of or arrayed in spatial systemic terms. It's just not going to happen. What is effected can be understood systematically, but the power to effect cannot, unless we wish to perpetuate the mistakes of perspectival man by erroneously converting intensities into spatial extensities. Unless we wish to perpetuate the mistakes of perspectival man by erroneously converting intensities into spatial extensities. We should also avoid the error of placing the quote-unquote effected into a causal relationship with the quote-unquote effecting. We should avoid the additional error of considering them in a dualistic fashion as antithesis, since this would amount to yet a further systematization. Nor can a purely categorical mode of consideration do justice to the temporal aspects enumerated. We are not dealing with incongruent phenomena, but with varied aspects and manifestational modalities of a basic phenomenon devoid of any spatial character. I will repeat for emphasis. We are not dealing with incongruent phenomena, but with varied aspects and manifestational modalities of a basic phenomenon devoid of any spatial character. Time is immeasurable, it is aspatial, it is an intensity, and it manifests in many different ways, many different modalities, as we just covered. In other words, a predominantly categorical evaluation is not appropriate here. Every categorical system is an idealized ordering schema by which actual phenomena are fixed and absolutized. As such, it is a three-dimensional framework with a static and spatial character. Such categorical systems are able to deal with the world only within a three-dimensional and conceptual world view. Now, I think that is actually where we will leave it off today. Yeah, I think so. I hope you guys enjoyed, and of course, I'll see you guys next week. Now, the Gebser videos I try to give you guys once a week, because I don't like this idea of starting a series and just being super inconsistent. Like, I appreciate you guys watching my series, so the least I can do is at least, feed you guys somewhat regularly, obviously within reason. If something comes up, but I'm going to try to give you guys that once a week, because from your perspective, I can't imagine how frustrating it would be for me to start this series, get halfway through, and then wait a month to do more Gebser because I'm too busy doing integral or rationalism stuff or whatever. So you're going to get a Gebser at least once a week. But the other videos, my Kill Rationalism series, my newly formed Seeing the World Integrally series, those are a little different because those I'm letting time speak to me. So right now, time is telling me, focus on the integral playlist. So tomorrow you'll probably get that. But again, do not worry. I'm not done my Kill Rationalism series. We will still continue it. But because, I think it's because the more and more I get into this book, the more I'm thinking about integral consciousness, the more I'm thinking about time. And so that's what's kind of driving me to make videos about the integral series and not Kill Rationalism. But those are still coming. So I love you guys. We're going to continue. We haven't quite finished this little mini section. Then we'll get into the awakening consciousness of integrity or the whole. And then depending on how long that video is, we'll either keep going into the new mutation or whatever. Either way, I love you guys. I cannot wait to see you soon. And I'll see you next week. Thank you guys.